You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. On December 8, 1776, Lieutenant General Henry Clinton from Britain headed an expedition out of New York City with the goal of taking over Rhode Island. Brigadier General Richard Prescott was in charge of the British forces, which included several regiments of Hessian foot soldiers. They successfully landed and took control of Newport, Rhode Island. In an impressive turn of events, France formally recognized the United States of America as a sovereign nation in February 1778. This recognition came after the British Army's surrender, following the significant battles of Saratoga in October 1777. The consequence of these developments was that France and Great Britain declared war on each other in March 1778. In April, France made a significant move in its support for America by sending Admiral Comte d'Estaing, along with a fleet consisting of 12 ships and 4,000 troops, with a mission to block the British fleet in the Delaware River. Despite the British being alerted to d'Estaing's voyage to America early on, internal disagreements among British political and military leadership resulted in a delay in their response, allowing d'Estaing to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar without any challenge. It wasn't until June that the British managed to dispatch a pursuit fleet of 13 ships under Vice Admiral John Byron. However, Byron's journey was slowed down by bad weather, and he didn't arrive in New York until the middle of August. By the time d'Estaing reached Delaware Bay in early July after a 3-month journey across the Atlantic, the British had already moved from Philadelphia to New York City, leaving the river clear. Upon finding New York's harbor too well defended, and believing that the French ships were too large to navigate into the harbor, the French and American leaders instead decided to focus their efforts on Newport, Rhode Island, which was under British control. However, while d'Estaing was figuring out his next step, British General Henry Clinton and Vice Admiral Richard Howe managed to send a reinforcement of 2,000 troops to Newport using a fleet of transports through Long Island Sound. These troops arrived on July 15th, bolstering the British forces there under Major General Robert Pigot to more than 6,700 men. Since late 1776, American and British forces have been locked in a standoff on Rhode Island following the British occupation. During this tense period, Major General Joseph Spencer, who led the Rhode Island defenses, was tasked by Major General George Washington to attack Newport in 1777. However, Spencer did not take action and was subsequently replaced. Come March 1778, Congress gave the green light for Major General John Sullivan to take over in Rhode Island. By early May, Sullivan had made his way there and got straight to work, evaluating the situation and beginning to plan an assault on Newport. He smartly hid equipment and supplies near Narragansett Bay and the Taunton River in preparation. Aware of Sullivan's moves, British General Pigot did not sit back. He launched an attack on May 25th, targeting Bristol and Warren, where he managed to destroy military supplies and cause extensive plundering. In response to these operations, Sullivan called for more support, a plea that was underscored by a congressional declaration after Freetown experienced a similar fate on May 31st. On July 17th, Washington wrote to Sullivan with orders to gather 5,000 troops for a potential strike against Newport. Sullivan received this message on July 23rd, only to be followed by Colonel John Lawrence's arrival the next day. Lawrence brought news that Newport was the chosen target and urged Sullivan to assemble the largest force possible. At that time, Sullivan's troops numbered 1,600. Lawrence had set off from Washington's camp on the 22nd, leading a troop movement that included brigades under John Glover and James Mitchell Varnum, all under the overall guidance of the Marquis de Lafayette. The announcement of French support infused new energy into the American cause, with militia from Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and the Continental Artillery rallying to Sullivan's side. However, these reinforcements took a while to assemble, with the bulk arriving in the first week of August. Major General Nathaniel Greene, a trusted officer and Rhode Island native, was dispatched by Washington on July 27th to strengthen Sullivan's command. Sullivan had faced criticism in Congress for previous battles, and now, with Greene and Lafayette's counsel, he was encouraged to steer towards a successful outcome. Greene did not hesitate to express the importance of their mission, emphasizing the critical need for success. On July 22nd, d'Estaing made his move away from his spot just outside New York Harbor. He timed his departure with the tide, which was high enough for his French ships to navigate through. Initially, he headed south, then veered northeast toward Newport. Back in New York, the British fleet, consisting of 8 ships led by Admiral Howe, quickly followed d'Estaing once they figured out he was heading for Newport. D'Estaing reached the area off Point Judith on July 29th, and without wasting time, met with Generals Greene and Lafayette to formulate a plan for their attack. The strategy they devised was for the American forces to advance to Aquidneck Island from the east side of Tiverton, while the French troops would embark from Conanicut Island, attacking from the west and aiming to encircle a group of British soldiers stationed at Butts Hill on the island's north end. The following day, D'Estaing did not hesitate to position his frigates in the Saconnex River and the main channel that leads to Newport, signalling their intentions to the British. Seeing what the Allies were undertaking, General Pigot, leading the British, opted for caution. He repositioned his men into a more defensive setup, withdrawing troops from Conanicut Island and Butts Hill, and even relocated almost all the livestock into the city. Orchards were torn down, and carriages and wagons were destroyed to ensure a clear line of sight for firing. When D'Estaing's ships began to approach, Pigot's forces could only watch helplessly as some of their auxiliary vessels were grounded and set aflame to prevent capture by the French. As the French fleet moved closer to Newport, Pigot ordered any remaining vessels to be scuttled, creating obstacles in Newport's harbour. By August 8th, D'Estaing had most of his fleet stationed in the harbour. The situation escalated on August 9th, when D'Estaing began disembarking about 4,000 of his troops onto Conanicut Island. That same day, General Sullivan found out that Pigot had left Butts Hill undefended. Contrary to the original plan he had with D'Estaing, Sullivan opted to occupy the deserted high ground, fearing the British might retake it with a reinforced presence. Although D'Estaing was initially upset about this manoeuvre, as were some of his officers, he later endorsed it. John Laurens noted that this decision gave much umbrage to the French officers, underscoring the tension it caused among the Allies. The fleet, led by Howe, was held back from leaving New York due to opposing winds, and it wasn't until August 9th that he appeared off Point Judith. Worried that Howe might get further reinforcements and ultimately outnumber him, D'Estaing quickly got the French troops on board and set sail to confront Howe on August 10th. However, as both fleets were positioning themselves to fight, a severe storm hit, lasting 2 days. This storm not only scattered the ships from both sides, but also heavily damaged the French flagship. The bad weather also threw a wrench in Sullivan's plans to attack Newport without the backing of the French on August 11th. While waiting for the French fleet to come back, Sullivan started siege operations, moving closer to the British positions on August 15th and digging trenches to the northeast of the British fortified line north of Newport the following day. As the fleets tried to come together again, there were a few chance encounters that led to minor battles at sea. In these skirmishes, 2 French ships, including D'Estaing's flagship, were significantly damaged. Eventually, the French fleet managed to gather again off Delaware and made their way back to Newport by August 20th, whereas the British fleet regrouped back in New York. Admiral D'Estaing, under pressure from his captains to head to Boston for repairs, chose instead to sail to Newport to let the Americans know he couldn't lend them support. When he arrived on the 20th of August, he told Sullivan, who argued that with the French's help, they could force the British into surrender in just a day or two. However, D'Estaing wasn't convinced, saying it's hard to believe that about 6,000 well-entrenched men with fortifications could be easily overrun in such a short time. His captains, already not on the best terms with him due to his quick rise to a high naval rank after serving in the French army, also didn't want to stay in Newport. The fleet set sail for Boston on the 22nd of August. This French decision made a lot of Americans angry, from ordinary soldiers to the high command. General Greene voiced a well-thought-out complaint, and John Laurens praised it as sensible and spirited. General Sullivan was more blunt, calling D'Estaing's choice a slight to France's honour, and even went further in his official communications, though these remarks were later toned down once everyone calmed down. American soldiers felt deserted, saying the French left in a most rascally manner. Following the French departure, many American militiamen, who had signed up for just 20 days, left, significantly reducing their force. On the 24th of August, Sullivan learned from General Washington that the British in New York, led by Clinton, were putting together a relief force. That night, his council decided to retreat to the island's northern part. Sullivan tried to get French help again, sending Lafayette to Boston to talk to D'Estaing, but nothing came of it. In Boston, both D'Estaing and Lafayette faced harsh criticism, with Lafayette noting he felt more under fire there than by the British lines at Newport. Meanwhile, the British weren't just waiting around. Howe received reinforcements with ships from Byron's delayed squadron and set off to intercept D'Estaing before he could reach Boston. Clinton, on the other hand, readied a force of 4,000 men under Major General Charles Gray and set off for Newport on the 26th of August. On the morning of August 28th, the leaders of the American forces made a crucial decision to pull back the last of their troops from the surrounding siege camps. For a few days leading up to this, they had sporadically fired cannon shots at the British, even as they started to move some of their equipment away. General Pigot of the British got wind of the American plans to retreat on August 26th, thanks to deserters, so he was ready to act when the Americans started their withdrawal that night. The American commanders strategically set up a defensive line across the whole island, just south of a valley that cut through it. Their aim was to block the British from gaining access to the strategic high ground in the north. They split their forces into two main groups for defense. To the west, General Greene amassed his troops near Turkey Hill, but dispatched the 1st Rhode Island Regiment about a half-mile south. Brigadier General James Varnum took charge of these advanced positions. To the east, Brigadier General John Glover positioned his troops behind a stone wall that gave them a good view of Quaker Hill. In response, the British planned their offensive move carefully, matching the American setup. They sent Hessian General Friedrich Wilhelm von Lossberg along the West Road and Major General Francis Smith along the East Road. Each was accompanied by 2 regiments and had specific orders not to launch a full-scale attack. However, this movement inevitably sparked the main battle. Smith's advance encountered an obstacle when his troops met with strong resistance from forces under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Brockholst Livingston, positioned near a windmill in proximity to Quaker Hill. To strengthen Smith's forces, Pigot gave orders to Major General Richard Prescott to dispatch additional soldiers, including the 54th Regiment and Montfort Brown's Prince of Wales American Regiment. With these reinforcements, Smith initiated another assault, this time directing the 22nd and 43rd Regiments alongside the flank companies of the 38th and 54th Regiments to target Livingston's left flank. Meanwhile, Livingston had acquired support from Colonel Edward Wigglesworth's 13th Massachusetts Regiment, following an order by Sullivan. Despite this reinforcement, Livingston was compelled to abandon his position and retreat to Quaker Hill. Confronted with the potential of being outflanked by a German regiment at Quaker Hill, Livingston and Wigglesworth decided to vacate the hill altogether, merging forces with Glover. Smith attempted to penetrate Glover's defenses with an initial attack but was repelled. Recognizing the strong configuration of the American forces, Smith chose not to advance with a comprehensive attack. This resolution led to the cessation of combat activities on the American left flank. By 7:30 in the morning, Lossberg and his forces took on the American Light Corps, led by Colonel John Lawrence, who had positioned themselves behind some stone walls south of Redwood House. Pushing through, Lossberg managed to drive Lawrence's troops back to Turkey Hill with the help of the Hessian Chasseurs, Huyn's Hessian Regiment, and the King's American Regiment under Edmund Fanning. Lawrence, who had gotten reinforcement from a regiment sent over by Sullivan, found his forces overrun by Lossberg, who then took Turkey Hill. After this, Lossberg began bombarding Nathaniel Greene's side of the American army with cannon fire. By 10 a.m., 3 British ships, the HMS Sphinx, the HMS Vigilant, and the HMS Spitfire galley, had made their way between Rhode Island and Prudence Island. They started bombarding Greene's troops, who were positioned on the American right flank. At this time, Lossberg decided to launch an attack on Greene. The German forces targeted Major Ward's 1st Rhode Island Regiment 3 times, but were pushed back on every attempt. As they retreated, they bayoneted the American wounded. Despite this intense battle, Greene's artillery, along with the American battery at Bristol Neck, were able to focus their firepower on the British ships, eventually forcing them to retreat. At 2 p.m., Lossberg tried to break Greene's lines once again, but didn't succeed. Greene fought back with forces that included Colonel Israel Angel's 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, a brigade of Massachusetts militia led by Brigadier General Solomon Lovell, and troops under Henry Brockholst Livingston. When a direct attack failed, Greene sent 1,500 men to flank Lossberg's right side. Outnumbered, Lossberg had no choice but to pull back to the top of Turkey Hill. By 3 p.m., Greene and his men secured a stone wall some 300 paces from the base of Turkey Hill. As the day came to a close, Greene tried to encircle the Hessians on Lossberg's left flank, but was repelled by Huyn's Hessians and Fanning's Provincials. The battle wound down, though some artillery exchanges continued into the night. The British ended up with 260 casualties, including 128 Germans. On the night of August 30th, the Continental forces pulled back to Bristol and Tiverton, effectively leaving Rhode Island, also known as Aquidneck Island, in the hands of the British. What's noteworthy is how well they managed this retreat, doing so in an orderly, calm manner. As reported by the New Hampshire Gazette, the retreat was executed in perfect order and safety, with the Continentals not leaving the smallest article of provision, camp equipage, or military stores behind. General Sullivan's sharp criticisms had already made their way to Boston before the French fleet's arrival, stirring some controversy. Initially, Admiral d'Estaing chose to respond with what could only be described as a dignified silence. Despite this rough start, efforts by American politicians, encouraged by Washington and the Continental Congress, helped ease tensions. By the time Lafayette reached Boston, Admiral d'Estaing was not only in better spirits, but also offered his support to the American cause, humorously suggesting he would become an infantry colonel under a former lawyer, a prospect that he jokingly implied would be daunting for any of his potential clients. By September 1st, the return of the relief force, led by Clinton and Gray to Newport, confirmed the end of the immediate threat. With the situation in Newport no longer critical, Clinton redirected Gray to conduct raids along the Massachusetts coast. Meanwhile, Admiral Howe's attempts to engage d'Estaing were thwarted, as d'Estaing maintained a strategic position at Nantasket Roads upon Howe's arrival on August 30th. When Byron took over for Howe in New York come September, he too found it challenging to blockade d'Estaing, ultimately facing defeat when a storm scattered his fleet as it approached Boston, allowing d'Estaing to head for the West Indies unchallenged. General Pigot later faced criticism from Clinton for not waiting for the relief force, a move that might have cornered the Americans on Rhode Island. Following this debacle, Pigot left Newport for England. In a consequential turn of events, the British eventually gave up Newport in October 1779, leaving its economy devastated by the impacts of war. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.